On this Friday night, grounded in Sudan, why Ottawa has paused rescue flights as people wait to escape, and the violence rages despite a ceasefire.
The situation is dangerous, it is volatile, it is intense.
New offer, the fresh optimism on the picket lines among federal workers. The never-ending policing saga in Surrey, BC.
It is a unique situation.
The province weighs in on whether the city should ditch the RCMP, the potential nationwide ripple effects. Plus, fast on her feet and in first place.
Let's hear it for our world champion.
The Canadian who danced her way to victory at an elite competition.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. We begin with breaking news tonight. 2 more Canadian rescue flights have just departed Sudan. That update from Defence Minister Anita Anand a short time ago. She did not say how many Canadians were on board, but this news comes after a volatile day on the ground. Nearly 2 weeks after the violent conflict erupted. Mike Drolet has our top story tonight.
It's becoming increasingly difficult to live as a civilian in Sudan. Even the street markets have become battle zones, and this is during a supposed ceasefire. The lineup to get out of Africa's 3rd largest country is getting longer. These women have been waiting 4 days for a bus they can afford. What used to cost $60 now goes for over $500. The lucky few are those with foreign passports. Nearly 2 weeks into the conflict, Germany has now ended its rescue mission. Canada, meanwhile, is just getting started. Facing criticism, it's been slow-moving and disorganized.
That is not the case, on my understanding.
The first 2 Canadian planes left Sudan Thursday, but other flights have been disrupted over mechanical issues, problems with the overused runway in Khartoum, and security concerns after a Turkish transport plane was shot at and began spilling fuel out of one of its wings.
Yes, of course there's risks. And arguably that's what our people in the Canadian Forces manage. You don't want to take unacceptable risks. Of course, you don't know what the bad guy is going to do. But a whole bunch of other nations are flying, so quite frankly, we should too.
Canada and other countries have soldiers on the ground to provide security at the airport. But while the Sudanese government has allowed evacuation flights to land, it can't control the chaos outside the airport. And it certainly can't ensure planes won't be fired upon.
All of that paints a picture that the situation is dangerous, it is volatile, it is intense, and we need to do whatever we can to ensure the safety and security of Canadians at the airport.
A difficult task as the demand to leave increases. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
There's some movement tonight in the federal public service labor dispute that's impacting key services across this country. The federal government has presented an offer to the union. Now, it's unclear if a deal is within reach, but negotiations are expected to run through the weekend, and picket lines are going strong as more than 150,000 government workers demand better pay and flexibility for remote work. Mackenzie Gray reports.
Yeah, solidarity hot dog right over here.
Fueling the fight against the feds.
I got chicken, I got veggie.
This hot dog stand set up outside the Prime Minister's office was party central for striking public servants.
Everybody seems to be giving high five, fist bumps, like everybody's cheering.
That positivity seemed to have made its way to the bargaining table, with the Liberals presenting a new offer to the Public Service Alliance of Canada this afternoon.
We know that our negotiators are putting forward serious offers and working constructively.
Both sides are tight-lipped on the details of the new offer, but the main sticking point remains wages. The union had been asking for a 13.5% increase over 3 years, but PSAC said it dropped its request this week. By how much, it won't say. As for the Liberals, they stood firm on their previous offer of 9% over 3 years.
Offering 9% is just completely disrespectful. Like, it's way under inflation.
The other key issue, the union wants the right to work from home in the collective agreement, so they can grieve managers that force employees into the office. The Liberal policy has civil servants physically at work for 2 to 3 days a week, but that's not good enough for some on the picket line.
I think without enshrining this in the collective agreement, there is probably a 90% chance that it's back to work 5 days a week.
But for most of the PSAC members, it's been 5 days a week protesting, with Treasury Board confirming that an average of 71,000 employees have withdrawn their services every day because of the strike.
I would suspect we're closer to the end of this thing than the beginning. There are only two ways it can end. One is a negotiated settlement, and the other is back to work legislation.
The hot dog stand is closed and the protesters have gone home until Monday, but both the union and the federal government have said they're willing to work through the weekend, Farah, to try and hammer out a deal.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you for that, Mackenzie. And you heard him in Mackenzie's report. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, though, has been heavily criticized for not being in Ottawa as this strike drags on. Instead, today, he was wrapping up his trip in New York, pitching business leaders on Canada's investment appeal and answering questions over this nation's involvement in one of the continent's fastest growing humanitarian crises. Neetu Garcha reports.
The Prime Minister's visit to New York City coming to a close with a keynote address to the Council on Foreign Relations.
You know who makes some of the cleanest steel in the world? Workers in Canada.
Trudeau spoke to the group of investors, business leaders, and venture capitalists about the country's investment interests, pitching Canada as a strong critical minerals trade partner.
Volkswagen made the decision to come to Canada because over the past 8 years, we've been working on environmental standards.
The Prime Minister also discussed calls for Ottawa to step up support for Haiti. The UN says the worsening political crisis and growing violence has led to unprecedented insecurity in the country.
Women and children are being abused and raped. People are being kidnapped. People are being killed. The security situation is awful.
The solution is not to come with an international force and go to Haiti and say, here we take the control of the place and we're going to help you. It's a guarantee for failure.
Trudeau told reporters determining how to respond is a challenge, but Canada is here to do the work.
First off, that means supporting the HNP, the Haitian National Police, to be able to have the resources, the pay, the uniforms, the training necessary.
I think that the solution on the long term is to really strengthen Haitian police. We don't have a lot of time to do that.
And time is of the essence. Canadian officials here say the $100 million Canada is providing to help shore up the police in Haiti is the type of commitment they're encouraging other countries, including the U.S., to make to help strengthen institutions from within the country. Farah?
Neetu Garcha in New York. Thank you so much, Neetu. After months of debate and uncertainty, BC's public safety minister has made his recommendation on the future of policing in the city of Surrey, the province's second largest municipality. Despite the wishes of the newly elected council, the provincial government is recommending the city continue with the transition away from the RCMP to the Surrey Police Service. It has been a long, costly road to get here, and it's not over yet. Global's Keith Baldry joins us from Victoria. Keith, how did we even get here?
So this saga began way back in 2018 when former Surrey Mayor Doug McCallum and his council began the transition away from the RCMP into their own municipal police force. His successor, Brenda Locke, as mayor, and her council reversed the process, saying they wanted to go back to the RCMP and abandon the municipal police force. That prompted the province to step in and look for some reports. The reports landed today with Minister of Public Safety Mike Farnworth releasing his decision, which is a strong recommendation for Surrey to continue the transition to its own municipal police force. The key finding, the RCMP does not have adequate staffing levels to be guaranteed to provide adequate safety levels for Surrey citizens. Also, the first time today announced the province is willing to assist with the considerable cost associated with making the transition. Here's Minister Mike Farnworth.
And that one of the best ways to ensure that that transition takes place smoothly is to recognize Surrey's concerns that if you continue with the transition, there would be costs associated to that. I think everyone recognizes the situation when it comes to Surrey is unique. It is the largest detachment, RCMP detachment in the country. It is one of the largest, I think, after the city of Vancouver in the province of British Columbia. That this is a very unique situation.
So it's going to be interesting if this transition does proceed. It's going to take about 3 years to complete it, and it does have potential implications for right across the country. There are a lot of municipalities currently served by the RCMP. The RCMP brand has taken a bit of a beating in recent years, and I think there's going to be a lot of interest viewed what's unfolding in Surrey, in Vancouver's backyard, over the next 3 years as they make the transition away from the largest RCMP detachment in the entire country. Farah?
Keith Baldry in Victoria, BC. Thank you, Keith. We're learning new details tonight about how Silicon Valley Bank fell apart. The U.S. Federal Reserve is admitting it failed and says it will now re-examine how it regulates banks. The U.S. Federal Reserve released a highly anticipated report analyzing the country's biggest bank failure since 2008. It says the regulator faulted its low standards and a lack of urgency to force SVB to address its weaknesses. That meant the bank remained well rated even as its poor governance, business model, and risk management led to its insolvency. Russia unleashes a new wave of missiles over Ukraine. Coming up, the rising casualties and the clues of a Ukrainian counteroffensive. Plus, teenage hero, the boy who sprung into action when his bus driver passed out. And springtime scorcher, the record-breaking weather baking Spain. To the war in Ukraine now and the findings of a UN committee report that's just been released detailing many of the human rights violations allegedly committed by Russian forces, and the UN pressing Moscow to investigate them.
The refusal of the Russian Federation to address these issues didn't hinder us from addressing them in our concluding observations, but of course it made our work more difficult.
Among the committee's findings were cases of torture, execution, arbitrary detainment, rape, as well as the forcible transfer of Ukrainian children, all of which Russia denies, including targeted attacks on civilians. Yet early today, another round of Russian missiles struck multiple Ukrainian cities, claiming more civilian lives. Here's Eric Sorensen.
A barrage of Russian missiles was shot down over Ukraine, but clearly not all of them. One destroyed a residential high-rise in Uman. Sergei Lubivsky says his neighbors who moved in when he did 30 years ago are all gone. No one is left, he says. The death toll, more than 20 and climbing, includes 4 children. President Volodymyr Zelensky called for a moment of silence, but also called upon the free world to remain committed to Ukraine's fight. Russia must lose, and its leadership must be punished, he said. There are signs that the expected Ukrainian counteroffensive in the east is about to start. The military is seeking out Russians with drones as Ukraine awaits more NATO weapons like this howitzer. They are super, says this artillery commander, better than the old Soviet-era models. We're able to push the Russians back and move the guns more quickly, he says. The counteroffensive will be crucial to demonstrate to NATO that with its help, Ukraine can succeed, says this analyst.
The Western world has given an enormous amount of aid, defensive weapons, and so I think it needs to demonstrate to all of its allies that it can use those weapons to good effect and push back Russian troops.
Today, the Pope lamented what's happening in Ukraine and what he called the soloists of war, while a new UN report wants Russia to respond to evidence of human rights violations. Is Russia listening? Vladimir Putin today called on Russians to counter the West's economic aggressions. Putin has not listened to outside voices for 14 months and does not appear to be listening now, least of all to Ukrainians like Sergei Lubivsky. They don't care, he says. They want to kill as many people as they can. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Spain hit its hottest ever April temperature on Thursday with a record 38.8 degrees in the southern city of Cordoba. The scorching figure comes as a large swath of the country deals with a blistering heat wave that has temperatures hovering 10 to 15 degrees warmer than expected for the month. The heat's also contributing to a prolonged drought in the region, which is stoking fears of a repeat of last summer's extreme fires. There is some good news in sight, though. Cooler temperatures are expected over the weekend. The monarchy and the Mounties. Ahead, the relationship between the royal family and the RCMP, dating back more than a century. A small delegation of RCMP officers was at Windsor Castle today to meet with King Charles III as His Majesty officially assumed his role as Commissioner-in-Chief. The honorary appointment came with a number of royal gifts from Canada's police force, including a prized horse that resembles one given to the late Queen Elizabeth decades ago. Crystal Gamansing reports.
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police riding on the grounds of the oldest and largest inhabited castle in the world. A special ceremony with King Charles III in honor of the RCMP's 150th anniversary and the upcoming coronation of the King. Your Majesty. King Charles is now the RCMP's Commissioner-in-Chief, a ceremonial role that was only created in 2012 for the late Queen Elizabeth in honor of her Diamond Jubilee. But the connection between the service and the sovereign goes back much further.
It's a relationship that stretches way back to 1897, when some members of what was then the Northwest Mounted Police participated in the Jubilee ceremony for Queen Victoria.
The cavalry's equestrian skills have led to a unique bond. This is the first horse from the RCMP musical ride for the King, Noble, a 7-year-old black mare. The Queen was given 8 horses. This one, Burmese, was the first one given to her by the RCMP, and she rode it for years during Trooping the Colour. Sergeant Major Scott Williamson rode at her funeral. Being part of the service at Windsor Castle with King Charles, he says, was heart-pounding.
You want to do our best when we're doing these things, and we rehearse and prepare. But then His Majesty comes and he's very relaxed, and he immediately puts everybody in kind of a relaxing tone.
The red surge against the historic castle gates attracted a lot of attention. Some wanted to know more about Noble, having heard of the horse's background in the musical ride.
So to be able to gift Noble to His Majesty says to us, the RCMP, and says to Canada that this special relationship, this personal relationship, is going to continue.
The King, it's hoped, will eventually ride Noble when his own horse is retired. The handover appeared to go well with lots of smiles, and while we couldn't hear what was said, clearly a few jokes were made. The pressure, however, is coming. 5 RCMP members will be riding in the procession on Coronation Day, and they will all be on horses gifted to the royals, including Noble. It's hoped that by seeing them in their uniforms taking part in a historic event will bring a sense of pride to those watching back home. Farah?
Oh, I'm sure. Crystal Gamansing in London, thank you for that. Next, the top honor for this elite Canadian Irish dancer. A 7th grader in Michigan is being hailed a hero after he sprung into action when his school bus driver fell unconscious. The driver reported feeling unwell just before passing out. The vehicle then began to veer into oncoming traffic, and that's when 13-year-old Dylan Reeves jumped in, calmly taking the wheel and bringing the bus to a stop.
Someone call 911.
The driver is recovering in hospital, and there was no damage to the bus. When police called Dylan's parents, his dad thought his son was in trouble, and then they told him, "This is a good call. Your son is a hero." With a little bit of Irish luck and a lifetime of training and skill, a Calgary woman has fulfilled a dream of a lifetime. Mackenzie Mahler is now a 2-time world champion in Irish dancing. The grad student beat out athletes from across the U.S., Australia, and the U.K. Now, as Heather Yorks West reports, she's hoping to inspire a new generation to the athletic art form.
It was a moment of pure joy. After 2 decades of training and dedication, Mackenzie Mahler claimed Irish dancing's top prize.
Let's hear it for our world champion.
And it was, just so exciting when the results came out, and we got to have that moment.
Back in her home studio in Calgary, Mahler says it was an honor to win the title with the championships held in Montreal. And she beat out favorites from around the world, including dancers from Ireland itself.
It was pretty special to win the Worlds on our home turf. Definitely flying the flag for Canada.
Popularized in the 90s by the success of shows like Riverdance, Irish dancing requires an incredible level of athleticism. For the Worlds, Muller trained for hours every day.
It's so fun. I don't mind all the hard work. I enjoy being here and putting in the time.
Muller is studying to be a sports performance psychologist, but she says Irish dance will always be part of her life. Whether she's perfecting footwork or passing on the steps to a new generation of performers.
It's just so exciting to get to see those light bulb moments that I remember having as a kid, and getting to see the excitement and the passion for it come up in somebody.
The dance sport may have Ireland's name, but this year a Canadian wears the crown. Heather Urex West, Global News, Calgary.
And that's Global National for this Friday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. This is Ottawa's Wellington Street, right in front of Parliament Hill. Late this afternoon, it reopened to vehicles, nearly 15 months after it was closed because of the so-called Freedom Convoy protest. Over the past 2 weeks, crews have set up new traffic signals, repainted traffic lanes, and opened a bike lane. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.